Thank you to all of you. It is wonderful to be here with so many friends in Tarrant County. Wayne?
Thank you for being here. A senator is supposed to be the common person's voice of the United States government. The House of Representatives joins the Senate in forming the legislative arm of our government, that part which writes and passes laws. An ideal Senate candidate would be one who interacts with the people and understands their desires, can fashion arguments and offer debate on the floor of the Senate, and deliver a passionate defense of our Constitution and our free market system at a time when the cornerstones of our freedom are under attack. Because David Dewhurst opted not to participate in this forum, we'll only be interviewing Ted Cruz tonight. Though our first question for Dewhurst would have been something along the lines of, why have you declined nearly 40 invitations to meet with the people you claim to want to represent? Mr. Cruz, since Dewhurst is running a new ad implicating you with Robert Miracle, and the Pennsylvania prison scandal, we'd like to hear your rebuttal to these charges.
Sure. It is the latest of a whole series of nasty, personal, false attack ads that the Dewhurst campaign has leveled at me. This one concerns a tragic prison scandal that occurred in Pennsylvania. I had nothing to do with the criminal proceedings in that matter. I had nothing to do with the civil litigation that arose out of that matter. I did, however, assist with an appeal for one individual, the individual who had built the prison, in a breach of contract action against an insurance company. That was my involvement. And what the Dewhurst campaign has done, and it's a consistent pattern, is they take that involvement and they produced ads. If you've seen the latest one, it looks like something out of Nightmare on Elm Street. With this, black and white, grainy playground, and it was tragic that there were corrupt judges in Pennsylvania that wrongfully sentenced kids. And actually, the individual who I represented in the insurance proceedings worked closely with the prosecutors to put those corrupt judges behind bars. And this is part and parcel of what we've seen in this race, which is my opponent has spent over $10 million in false, nasty attack ads, and new ones will come every day. If you have questions on this or any other attack ads, because no one knows what the attack ad tomorrow will be, you may always go to the website, tedcruz.org. Within 24 hours, right at the top, we have a link that says Get the Facts, and we will have the facts on whatever the attack du jour is.
Ted, you touched upon some of the China ads that are being run right now. You claim that another ad from Dewhurst's campaign about China contains several lies. Please just briefly touch on 2 or 3 of the lies you feel are most significant.
Well, the China attack is what he's devoted the most money, over $10 million to the China attack. I got to tell you, my 2 little girls sure were astonished to discover they were secretly Chinese. What's the story with the China attack? Again, if you want to know the details, there are 11 falsehoods detailed on the website. Let me tell you the 2 that are most important. Number 1, the man that Dewhurst tells you is a, quote, American manufacturer. The man who he features in every single one of these attack ads. What he doesn't mention is 20 years ago, he moved his entire factory to China. So this was never a lawsuit between an American company and a Chinese company. This is a lawsuit between 2 Chinese tire factories. And it didn't impact even a single U.S. manufacturing job. Now, Dewhurst knows that, and he's deliberately not telling people that. The second major lie at the heart of this attack is Dewhurst says this case is my record on U.S. intellectual property. I didn't even argue this case. I've never appeared in any courtroom anywhere in connection with this case. If you want to know my record on U.S. intellectual property, I would suggest that folks should look to a case I did argue. which is last year in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, I represented a major manufacturer against a Chinese company that had stolen a U.S. patent. And at my urging, the Supreme Court, by a vote of 8-1, upheld a $5 million verdict against the Chinese counterpart. That's my actual record. And let me point out something more broadly. There is a reason why my opponent is doing this. He is following the same strategy Barack Obama is. Indeed, boo! He doesn't want to talk about the issues. Obama doesn't want to talk about a $16 trillion debt. He doesn't want to talk about 25 million Americans out of work. So instead, he engages in nasty, false personal attacks. And let me make a point very clear, which is despite the millions of attacks coming at me, and they are character attacks, they are personal attacks, they're using every adjective in the book. They've called me corrupt, a liar, a hypocrite. The latest one, they called me a pig. You have to admit, when I leave my socks on the floor, my wife sometimes agrees with me. But be that as it may. Our campaign is not going to reciprocate.
Much of the damage that the Obama administration has done to our economy and to our future has been done by various federal agencies like the EPA, NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, Department of Interior, Health and Human Services, Department of Justice, and others. These organizations have gotten away with circumventing Congress by instituting new regulations and ignoring legislation that is signed into law. If elected, would you attempt to rein in these agencies, and if so, what can be done?
Absolutely yes. That is a tremendously important question. We have the federal regulatory agencies in Washington are run amok. I'm running on a 12-point jobs and growth plan. The first 6 steps are stopping the Obama war on jobs. And the second 6 are unleashing the private sector. A great many of those first 6 apply directly to that question, Wayne, such as revoking the offshore drilling moratorium. And I'll point out from the beginning, my campaign has been based on a proven record. Every candidate in Texas says he supports oil and gas. Unless you're a blithering idiot. I feel confident in this entire forum. Nobody stood on this platform and said, I hate oil. This is Texas. But when Obama put the offshore drilling moratorium in place, I represented the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and 29 chambers of commerce up and down the Gulf Coast, challenging the moratorium in federal court. And the Federal Court of Appeals agreed with us the moratorium was contrary to federal law. Now, sadly, in a pattern of lawlessness that typifies this administration, Obama just reissued the moratorium and de facto stopped granting permits. But we need senators who will stand up to Obama and stand up to his abuse. We need to dramatically roll back the EPA. How many of y'all are familiar with the lizard out in West Texas? Now, my view of a lizard is they make darn fine boots. But going back to a proven record, when I was the Solicitor General of Texas, the chief lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, serving under Greg Abbott, we led a coalition of states in front of the U.S. Supreme Court arguing that the Endangered Species Act is unconstitutional, as it applied to an arroyo toad in California. And we argued that Congress, under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, doesn't have the authority to regulate a toad that has never crossed state lines. That's the difference between a candidate who is just reading from talking points and somebody who has been walking the walk and fighting the fight. We need to rein in all of these agencies. And let me mention one other bill, and we could talk the whole night on executive overreach. Let me mention one other bill. It's a bill actually called the REINS Act, which I strongly support. It is a bill that would provide, and it's pending in Congress right now, that no federal regulation will go into effect if it would impact the economy $100 million or more unless it is affirmatively authorized by Congress.
Good idea.
Now, I'd like to see the threshold be a heck of a lot lower than $100 million. Because I think you've got unelected bureaucrats that are killing jobs free from the oversight of the elected legislature and the people. But I'll tell you, the $100 million threshold would get many of the worst rules and stop them, and that's something I intend to fight for vigorously in Congress.
Personally, I'd also like to see the REINS Act include a litmus test to prove that the bill is constitutional.
Absolutely, yes.
We are now approaching $16 trillion in federal debt. The current limit on our debt is set at about $16.4 trillion, which means we will likely reach the limit very early in 2013, if not this year. If elected, what short-term actions would you propose to avoid raising it again? And are there circumstances where you would consider, you would be convinced to vote to raise it?
A tremendously important question. Look, our nation's in crisis. We're going broke.
That's right.
The national debt is larger than the gross domestic product. And the unhappy truth is it's been career politicians in both parties who's got us in this mess.
Yes.
And that's what has sparked this great awakening sweeping Texas and sweeping the country. Millions of Texans and Americans saying, stop spending money we don't have. There will be no senator in the U.S. Senate, bar none, who will be a more vigorous, a more relentless, a more strategic, and I believe a more effective advocate of shrinking the size, power, and spending of the federal government than I intend. With respect to the debt limit, my view the last time they raised the debt ceiling was that I would agree to raise the debt ceiling in one circumstance and one circumstance only, which is I was one of the first candidates in the country to come out for cut, cap, and balance. 3 preconditions to raising the debt ceiling. Number 1, substantial cuts in the budget now. Not, in Washington there's this weird doublespeak where they call a slight decrease in a rate of growth a cut. I got to tell you, I'm not nearly smart enough to figure that out. For me, a cut means the number today is smaller than the number yesterday. And if it isn't, it ain't a cut. The second requirement is caps, enforceable spending caps going forward to restrain the out-of-control congressional spending. And the third and most important requirement is balance, that Congress not vote on, pass a strong, balanced budget amendment. And when I mean a strong, balanced budget amendment, I think a balanced budget amendment should have 3 critical elements. Number 1, it should require that the budget be balanced. Number 2, it should require a supermajority to raise taxes, so that it doesn't become an excuse for a bunch of elected officials to jack up our taxes. And number 3, and this is actually, I think, the most important of the 3, that there be spending limits on the federal budget as a percentage of GDP. That is the only circumstance under which I would be willing to raise the debt ceiling, is if we passed cut, cap, and balance, and we dramatically turned us back from this cliff we're heading.
Question number 5. It is certain that in order to balance the federal budget, entitlements must be subjected to significant reforms. Please be as specific as possible about what you believe should be done to reform Medicare and Social Security.
Another incredibly important question. It is impossible to balance the federal budget without fundamental entitlement reform. Anybody who tells you differently is lying to you. Let me give you some very simple math. Right now, 40 cents of every dollar the federal government spends is borrowed. 2/3 of the federal budget consists of entitlements and interest on the debt. That means you could literally shut down the entire federal government, fire the Army and Navy, close the FBI, shut down the national parks, padlock the U.S. Capitol. The last one of which may not be a bad idea. And the budget still wouldn't balance. Now, for years it was the case that entitlement reform was the third rail of politics. You touch it, you get electrocuted. Paul Ryan, who has been leading courageously on this issue, the Democrats have run ads literally showing him throwing Granny off the cliff. You know, I'm convinced the American people are ready for serious leadership on this issue. And I'm campaigning on fundamental entitlement. I think the Democrats are being reckless, allowing Social Security and Medicare to careen towards bankruptcy, rather than stepping up and saving those vital bulwarks of our society. Now let's talk specifics. Let's talk Social Security for a moment. I think fundamental reform should include 4 elements. Number 1, anyone on Social Security or near retirement, there should be no changes whatsoever. We have made promises to people. They have planned and ordered their fiscal affairs based on those promises, and we owe it to them to carry through with our commitments. But for younger workers, I'm 41 years old. For people my age, a lot of people my generation don't think Social Security will be there for us in the first place. 3 simple reforms can save Social Security so it's there not just for us, but for our kids and their kids. Number 1, gradually increase the retirement age. When FDR signed Social Security into law, the retirement age was 65. The average life expectancy was 62. It's now 78. People are living much, much longer than they were then. We need to have Social Security reflect that reality. Number 2, right now, Social Security benefits grow roughly 1% more than inflation each year. If you simply have benefits grow to match inflation rather than exceeding inflation, that compounded over time, those 2 reforms bring Social Security into solvency. But the third reform that I think is critical is for younger workers. Allow them to keep a portion of their tax savings, or their tax payments, in a personal account that they own, they control, and that when they die, they can pass on to their kids and their grandkids. Yes.
This is a question from the audience. So you still believe the United Nations can be saved, even though over 60% of its members are Muslims who want to destroy us?
Well, saved? No. Look, the United Nations, there are many nations in the UN whose interests are very different than our own. And they are working to undermine, often, U.S. national security and our sovereignty. Now, my view is we need to stand up and defend ourselves. As many of you know, the biggest case of my tenure, the biggest fight of my tenure as Solicitor General, was Medellin versus Texas. A case that began where an illegal alien murdered 2 teenage girls in Houston, and the World Court, the judicial arm of the United Nations, issued an order to the United States for Texas not to execute that illegal alien and to reopen the convictions of 51 murderers across this country. Texas stood up and we fought the World Court. I argued this case twice in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. On the other side were 94 foreign nations, and on the other side was the President of the United States. The President signed an order that attempted to order the state courts to obey the world court. And so Texas stood up, we fought the World Court, we fought the United Nations, we fought 90 foreign nations, and we fought the President of the United States. We defended U.S. sovereignty, and we won the 63rd. So to go right to the heart of that question, I believe it is in our interest to remain within the UN because we have a veto on the Security Council. And if we left the UN, we would give up our veto. We would hand the Security Council over to Russia and China, and they would use it to undermine our influence. And the ability to veto what the UN does is a powerful tool for U.S. national security. Beyond that, the instant we left, they would immediately act against the nation of Israel because it is only the United States veto that prevents the UN from doing that. But at the same time, I think we cannot be naive. We cannot fail to understand that they're trying to undermine our sovereignty. We need to stand up against it, and we need to use the 22% of the dues that we pay as leverage to force reform or we cut off their money. Yeah!
This next question basically has to do with conscientious clause. Would you fight to repeal all of the Health and Human Services mandate that would force Catholic schools, institutions to offer contraceptives, etc.?
Absolutely yes. You know, when President Obama issued the decree trying to force Catholic hospitals and Catholic charities to cover abortifacients and contraceptives, it was truly a sad and staggering day. It was a trifecta. It embodied three of Obama's worst characteristics. Number one, his continuing assault on the Constitution. Number two, his contempt for religious liberty. And number three, his relentless effort to draw power into Washington over the economy and our lives. I think the HHS mandate was wrong. I think it was unconstitutional. And I intend to stand and lead the fight to get rid of it in the U.S. Senate.
This is a question from the moderator. We've all become familiar with the fact that the Senate is required to sign a treaty. But yet we're looking at what's taking place with Agenda 21 here in the United States. It's being referred to as soft law. There are numerous UN initiatives, quote-unquote, treaties that we're looking at today. Law of the Sea Treaty and small arms. How would you fight against a president from implementing these treaties through soft law and funding them through the various agencies, ultimately enforcing those treaties within the Constitution of the United States?
Look, this is an ongoing assault. This is a tool the left is using more and more to undermine our constitutional rights, to undermine our sovereignty, and that is treaties, foreign law, and foreign courts and foreign bodies. You mentioned Agenda 21, the Law of the Sea Treaty, the Small Arms Treaty, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Every one of these either is, in the case of Agenda 21, or they're trying to make be an assault on our liberty and our sovereignty. You know, when we were talking about the Medellin case, one of the leading opponents of the state of Texas in Medellin was the dean of Yale Law School, a man named Harold Coe, who twice filed briefs against the state of Texas, arguing that the U.S. justice system should be completely and totally subservient to the World Court of the United Nations. One of the first things Barack Obama did when he was elected president is he appointed Harold Coe to be the chief legal advisor at the U.S. Department of State. So the most radical academic in the country for undermining U.S. sovereignty became the #1 lawyer at the U.S. State Department. I will tell you there is probably nothing for which I am better known for nationally than being one of the leading defenders in this country of U.S. sovereignty, of standing up to the UN, and I intend the Senate to use every tool at my disposal to stop these treaties, to stop Agenda 21, to cut off the funding, and to protect our rights.
The next question has to do with immigration reform. You and your opponent claim to be the most conservative. As such, both claim to be against amnesty. If elected, what do you plan to do about immigration reform? The DREAM Act does not address 14 million illegals. Self-deportation does not address the 14 million illegals, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, how would you address the illegal alien issue in the United States?
It's an enormous challenge. We have an illegal immigration crisis in the United States. And unfortunately, neither party is remotely serious about solving it. My views on immigration are simple. I can state them in 3 propositions. We need to do everything humanly possible to secure the border. I am categorically opposed to amnesty. And we need to remain a nation that doesn't just welcome, but that celebrates legal immigrants who follow the rules and come here seeking the American dream. The amazing thing is, 80% of the American people agree with all 3 of those propositions. The problem is we lack the political will in Washington to get it done. Now, what does it mean to do everything humanly possible to secure the borders? That means fences, that means walls, that means technology like helicopters and drones with infrared, and most importantly, that means boots on the ground. I intend to lead the fight to triple the U.S. Border Patrol. It also means ending the policies that serve as a magnet to bring people to this country.
Thank you.
It means ending sanctuary cities.
All right.
Thank you.
It means ending benefits for illegal aliens like in-state tuition. And I will point out, this is an issue on which my opponent and I have some very substantial disagreements. In the first debate of the runoff, Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst looked at the TV camera and said, "I have never supported amnesty. I have never supported a guest worker program." I have to admit, I shifted away slightly, afraid lightning would strike. The next day, the Houston Chronicle broke the story of a speech he gave in 2007, where he said, "I support a guest worker permit for every single illegal alien here today." Now, I will note, the Dewhurst amnesty was substantially broader than Barack Obama's amnesty. Obama's amnesty, which he lawlessly implemented through executive decree, just covers kids, just covers children who came here illegally. The Dewhurst amnesty is not limited to kids. It proposes giving a guest worker permit to every single illegal alien in the United States today. Now, what was the source of that claim? Because everything I say about his record, he says is a lie. The source of that claim was the written text of the speech he gave in 2007 accepting the award of Mr. South Texas, and it was found on the official government website of Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst. So what happened when this became public, that the written text of his own speech made clear that he had advocated an amnesty broader than Barack Obama? He ordered the state employees to delete the speech and disable the link. So not only is he running away from his record, he's literally trying to delete the evidence. But you know the great thing about what has happened in the last 3 years all across this country, the great thing about the rise of the Tea Party, you can't do that. You can't hide from the people because y'all are paying attention. And God bless you for it. Dan Rather discovered the power of the people. And let me say, what the Tea Party is doing in Texas and all over the country is holding elected officials of both parties accountable. And I'll say right now, hold me accountable too. The stakes are too high for us not to get serious about addressing the problems facing this country.
Ted, this question is to try to,
Oh, are we out of time?
For you, just for now.
Thank you.